What's up guys? I'm super pumped today because I'm going to be showing you how I make a sculpted snowman cake. There's no fondant covering necessary in this tutorial. It's a great cake for beginners, someone that wants to make a really impressive sculpted cake in not too much time. This cake is covered completely in buttercream, and with a really awesome texturing technique, we can make the buttercream look like real snow. This snowman cake really comes to life by the time you're finished working on it. So stick with me, I'm going to show you guys just how easy it is to put together this sculpted snowman cake. So the first thing you have to do for your snowman is stack up your cakes and fill them. So I'm using 6-inch cakes here, and I have 4 6-inch cakes that I filled with about 1/4 inch of buttercream, and then I chilled this in the refrigerator for a couple hours until it was nice and firm. It's about 6 inches high, so it's pretty high stack of cakes. So I'm going to take a sharpened dowel and insert it just straight down into the center of the cake, and then I'll kind of give it some stability so it doesn't wobble back and forth since it's so wide. And then I have a cake drum here that's 3 10-inch cake rounds. So when I push my dowel in, it's going to go down into the cake cardboards that are the base, and now I know my cake is nice and firm. So at this point, now that our cake is firm and now that it's doweled in the center for stability, we can start carving it and shaping it into that nice round snowman shape. At the very center of the stack here, where it's 6 inches wide, we want to keep that width. The very top, I want to taper up to about 4 inches, so I have a 4-inch cake pan. And then the bottom I want to taper into about 5 inches. So I'll start on the bottom. I'm just going to take a serrated knife and I'm just going to start carving in just a little bit. I only need to take in about 1/2 inch on each side. So once you've taken off about 1/2 inch on the bottom of the cake, I like to take my knife and just hold it at an angle and just kind of turn the cake just to further refine that shape. You can kind of use your hands to further round out that shape. So I'll get down at it with eye level, and it looks like I need to taper it in just a bit more. So I'm also going to bring my carving up just slightly here, just slightly up the sides. And I'll continue tapering this in just a touch more. All right, so to start tapering in the top, like I said, I want to take this to about 4 inches. So I have a 4-inch cake pan, and I'll just use my knife and start carving away just a little bit at a time. It helps to have a bowl to put your scraps right in so you don't end up with too much of a mess on your table. And slow and steady wins the race whenever you're carving a cake. You can always take off more, you can always further refine your shape, so it's a lot better to start carving less than you need at first than to carve too much and think that you can't fix your mistake. So I'll just start by taking off little pieces at a time. And then this edge right here that's kind of sharp, I'm going to blend that into the rest of the cake. And if your knife starts to get any cake stuck to it, if it gets kind of gummy and sticky, it helps to just scrape it off on the edge of a cake pan or clean it off in some hot water, just so you can keep getting nice sharp cuts. So now that I'm happy with the shape, I'll just give the cake one more tap in and round it out a little bit more with my hands, and then I'm going to take some buttercream. It's a nice thin consistency. It's just my favorite American buttercream. You can find the recipe that I use on my blog. And I'm just going to give the cake a nice crumb coat. If you accidentally gouged out any big pieces of cake or you have any really big gaps to fill in, you can do that right now as you're crumb coating, and after that you won't even know that it happened. So make sure you get the buttercream all the way down to the very bottom edge. You really want to seal in the cake and seal in all those crumbs right down to the very bottom edge of the board. So then once you're happy with your crumb coat, you can just use your spatula, you could use a piece of cardboard, a piece of acetate, a bowl scraper, something that you can just kind of contour to the edge of the cake and just further smooth out that crumb coat. This will help you refine that shape even more and get it nice and round. So now I'm just going to pop my snowman bottom in the fridge, let it chill down for about an hour until it's nice and firm. So while the snowman is chilling in the fridge, I'm going to start on its head. So I'm using rice cereal treats to sculpt his head. And you can just roll the rice cereal treats into a big ball, but I have a plastic chocolate mold here that comes apart in 2 pieces, and It's almost about 4 inches across. So before I get my hands all dirty and make these rice cereal treats, I'm just going to give the chocolate mold a spray with some nonstick spray so that the cereal comes out nice and easily. And I've melted down about a cup of mini marshmallows. And I'm gonna start adding the rice cereal treats. I'll add about 2 cups to start with, and then just stir it up. So I'll just start to shape this into a sphere. And like I said, if you don't have this mold, you can just use your hands. But if you have some type of round mold, it just helps to get a nice shape. And then I'll just press both sides together. So now I have a nice circle of rice cereal treat. So I have 2 dowels that I've dipped the very end in melted marshmallows so that the dowels will be nice and sticky, and they'll stick in my rice cereal ball as I push them in. And I'm using 2 dowels because it's going to give the head a bit more stability when we push it into the cake, as opposed to just using one central dowel. It'll keep the head from spinning around. So once I've inserted these in there, I'll just make sure I'm still happy with my round shape. And now I'm just going to put this whole thing in the refrigerator or the freezer until it gets nice and firm. So now that my cake's gotten nice and firm, it's time to put on the final coat of buttercream. So I have some more American buttercream, and I actually just added a little bit of white food coloring to it, probably about a teaspoon of white food dye per 2 cups of buttercream, just to make the buttercream a nice snowy white color. It is made with butter, so it's a bit off-white. And then to get the final coat of buttercream on my snowman, I like to use a pastry bag. You could just spread it on with a spatula, but I find this technique to just be a bit quicker. So I'll start at the bottom with my bag against the bottom of the cake, just applying even pressure. I'm just letting that icing come out of the bag and go onto the side of the cake, and I'm just turning the turntable as I pipe. And then once I get to the very top, I'll just take a nice dollop of icing and frost it the rest of the way down. So now I'll take a piece of acetate and kind of curve it just a little bit in my hand and just use it to smooth on that final coat of buttercream. And we want a good coating here. I like using the bag because it gets a nice even coat, about 1/4 of an inch of buttercream for this final coating. I want to make sure that I don't see any of those crumbs or any of that cake in my final coating here. If you find that you want the outside edge of your snowman to stick out just a little bit more, you can put another coat of buttercream right around the very middle of the cake to give the illusion that it's a little wider than it is. So now to get that snowy, kind of stucco-y looking texture on the buttercream, I'll take a fresh piece of plastic wrap. I'll just kind of ball it up in my hands. And I'm just going to start kind of like in a sponge painting motion, just tapping and then pulling the plastic wrap away from the buttercream. And you can see right away that it starts to add a lot of really cool texture. And all of those lines, any of those kind of like impression marks, are just going to start disappearing. And if you find that you're getting too much texture, just kind of wind that plastic wrap up a little bit, roll it just a little bit tighter in your hands, and it will pull at the icing just a little bit less. So I find that it's really helpful to be using an American buttercream here. I love Swiss meringue buttercream, but I've never used it for this technique, but you certainly could try it out. And once your plastic wrap kind of gets a good amount of buttercream on it, just grab a new piece. The harder you press into the buttercream, the more texture you're going to get, and the lighter you press, the less texture you're going to get. If there are any spots that you find are just like too textured, you can just use your gloved hand and just kind of smooth them out or flatten them back down. All right, so I'll pop this in the fridge just to harden this up so I don't mess up any of my texture. And then we're gonna add the same effect to the board just so it looks like the snowman is sitting in more snow. So I'll pop this back in the fridge for about 20 to 30 minutes. So once your Rice Krispie head is firmed up enough, you can apply buttercream to it and texture it kind of in the same way. And you'll just wanna start by putting basically a crumb coat on it. And I find this really easy to do just with my hands. And then we'll just pop this in the fridge until it firms up. All right, so now that my main cake body and my snowman head have both had a chance to chill, I'm just going to pick the head up and find the front of what I think is the head. And I'll just kind of look at my cake and see which part I like is the front of the body, and I think what's facing me looks good as the front. Right in the center of the cake, place this head. Push it straight down. Perfect. So now I need to put another coat of buttercream on the head, and then I'll use some more plastic wrap to texture it in the same way. So now that my head is in place, I can use my turntable and just really easily, really quickly put a nice coat of frosting on this. And we are going to be attaching some things to the snowman's face, so I don't want as much buttercream on the face or the head as I placed on the body. So you can just put a little bit less. And I find that it's easier when you're putting the buttercream on the head to kind of like frost it down, maybe, than going from side to side, but however you're comfortable. We just want to get a nice coat of frosting right down to where his head meets the rest of his body. So I'll switch back to my acetate, and I'll use this just to refine this circular shape just once more before I texture his head. Awesome. All right, fresh plastic wrap. Scrunch it up and get to texturing. I think this is the most fun part of this cake. My cake drum here is perfect as it is, but I want to add some snow to the cake drum. So I'm going to basically just spread a thin layer of buttercream on the cake drum, bringing it right up to the base of the snowman, and then I'll texture it in the very same way. So just spreading that icing right up to the very bottom where we carved in the beginning. So now just back to my plastic wrap, I'll just repeat that same sponging motion, and I'll texture the entire base of the cake. And then I want to clean up the very side because I'll be gluing a ribbon on here when I'm done. So just run my finger over it, straighten up that buttercream a little bit. So as your snowman is hanging out in the fridge, chilling, it's a good time to get started on all the decorations. So I'm going to be showing you how I make the twig arms for the snowman. We're going to make a scarf. We're going to make an awesome little carrot nose, and I'm going to show you how I make a knit cap. And for these decorations, I'm going to be using fondant. You could also use modeling chocolate. You could use store-bought fondant or homemade fondant. Any of them will work for the decorations on this cake. So I'll start by making my snowman's arms because I want them to dry a little bit. So I have two 6-inch lollipop sticks here that I'm going to use to support the arms. And I have a ball of brown fondant. So I'll just give this fondant a knead. And then I'm just going to roll it into a snake. And I want the snake just a little bit longer than my lollipop stick. So now I'll cut this in half. And I'm going to take some piping gel and paint some piping gel just on the inner about 2/3 of the stick. So I'll press this down into the fondant, allow the fondant to kind of smush up around the stick, and then I'm going to just pinch it around. And now all I have to do is smooth that seam a little bit with my hands and just give it a roll on the table. And it's great if this looks nice and rough because it's supposed to be a stick anyway. So I'm leaving some space at the very top so that I can attach the mitten to the stick, and then I'm leaving some space at the bottom so that I can insert the stick into the snowman. So the nose is really simple. I just have a gumdrop size piece of dull orange fondant. I'll just give it a knead so it's nice and smooth. Roll it into a circle in my hands. Carrot shape. I'll just point one end and then I'll flatten the other end so that it sits nicely up against the side of the cake. You can make the nose as long or as short as you want it to. And then I'm just going to take a toothpick and dip my toothpick into some piping gel. And I'll just insert that into the nose. So just to add some more life to this, add some texture like you see on a real carrot, I'll just roll another toothpick just along the carrot to kind of add those lines that you see on a real carrot. All right, so we're gonna give this snowman like a knit cap. So to do this, I'm gonna start with a piece of fondant and I'll roll it out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. And I want it to be about 6 inches in diameter. So I'll try and keep it fairly round as I'm rolling. I don't want to apply too much cornstarch to the top of it because I'm going to be painting this once I have it in place. So I'll set this just aside. So now I'll take a piece of white fondant and I'll give this a little knead, and I'm just going to use this to build up the height of the snowman's head under his cap so that the cap sits a little higher and it looks a little fuller and a little more lifelike. And I just want to shape it into kind of like a half sphere, and I'll see how this fits on top of his head. So I want to make it just a little bit wider, so I'll pinch the edges just to thin the edges down and still kind of keep that shape. And I'll center this on top of his head, and it should stick in place pretty easily. And then I'll take some buttercream just in a paper bag right here and just kind of pipe around where that fondant meets the top of the snowman's head, just to make it sticky right there. And then I'm going to take my red fondant, place it right on top. And then I'm just going to smooth the fondant just as I stretch out the wrinkles, really similar to just like covering a cake. I find it's easier to smooth the fondant on this way and then cut it away, as opposed to trying to cut like a perfect circle and then fit it over the snowman's head. So once I have about like an inch of fondant smoothed down, and your palm is really great for this because it's round, place your cake on your turntable, and then with an X-Acto knife or like a scalpel, just hold the knife in place really still, really level, and then turn the cake. And this way you can cut a nice even hat. And the edge doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to hide the edge with our brim. And then peel that extra off. Great, and then you can smooth it into place one more time. And then to add some texture to this and like the illusion of it being a knit cap, I'm just going to take my Dresden tool and just drag down, leaving like a little bit of space in between each one. And this kind of implies the fact that this is like a knit cap and it's like knit together. And I'm just going to take a fine paintbrush and just paint like some stitching lines. And I'll just do this all the way around. And I'm not going to go to the very bottom because this will get covered up by the little knit brim of the hat. All right, so once you finish painting, we're going to add a cool little pom-pom to the top of this. So I'm going to use white. You could use whichever color you'd like. And I'll just place a toothpick in the top. And I have about like a 1-inch ball of fondant. And I'll just roll this into a circle and then center it right on top. And then to give it some texture, I'm going to take just a piping tip and just texture the entire thing, just to rough it up and make it look kind of like frilly and puffy. All right, so I'll roll out some more red, and I want this rim to be like nice and puffy and look like it's turned up. So I'm not going to roll it too thin. I'll probably roll it like between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch thick. So using a ruler and a pizza cutter, I'll cut like a 1/2 inch strip. And then I'll just take my fingers and just kind of like round out the edges. And then I'll take my Dresden tool again, and I'm just going to add some more texture, just kind of some lines in like a zigzag pattern. So I'll just take a little bit of buttercream, pipe it like at the very base of the hat in like 4 spots all the way around. Front, back, and then on the sides. Then I'll take the very center of my brim, line it up with the bottom edge of the hat, wrap it all the way around, and then press it into place. And then when I get to the back, I'll just take my scalpel and I'll cut one end clean. I'll line the other end up and give that a cut as well. And I'll just push both edges together. And I'll take my texturing tool and retexture those lines I had to kind of hide that seam. And if your hand smushed out any of the texturing as you were going around, you can go back at this point and redefine those lines. So once my nose was nice and dry, I just pressed it into place. So to make my scarf, I've rolled out some yellow fondant to about 1/8 of an inch thick. I don't want it to be too thick because I want to be able to ruffle this scarf and give it some movement like a real wool scarf would have. So if your fondant's a little bit thinner, you can ruffle it and manipulate it a little bit easier. So I want this to be about 2.5 inches wide. And then to fit it around my snowman's neck, I need about 9 inches in length. So I've flipped this over and I'm just putting a little bit of shortening on the very end. And then I'll just like crimp the end over just so the edges of the scarf are nice and rounded. It looks a bit nicer than having like a cut edge. So I'll just turn that in and then press it into place, and I'll do the same thing with the other side. So to ruffle the fondant and give it a bit of movement like a real scarf would have, I'll kind of just fold it like accordion style, kind of like you were folding a piece of paper into like a paper accordion. And then when I get the whole thing folded up, I'll turn it over and just kind of like pinch the edges. So just to make sure that the scarf stays where it should, I'll pipe a bit of buttercream just around the snowman's neck. And then holding my two pinched ends, I'll just place that scarf around, and I'll just put the seam in the back just so we don't see it. And it should stay still pretty easily, or stay in place. So I'll press the one seam in, and then I'll kind of gather the other in place. So now to make the hanging part of the scarf, I'll take a piece of fondant that's also about 2.5 inches wide, about 5 inches long, and I'll repeat the same process of turning the edges in to make it nice and rounded. So I'll turn in about 1/2 inch of fondant on each side. Then I'll cut one side clean. So now I'll use my texturing tool to draw 2 lines across the bottom of the fondant. And then at the very bottom of these lines, I'll use my X-Acto knife just to cut some frills. I like those swoopy little ends of a scarf, kind of where all those tassels hang down. And then I'll just use the knife to separate them, kind of give it some movement. Okay, so now to attach this piece to the side of the snowman, I'll just use a sculpting tool just to pull back that fondant just a little bit. Get a little bit of buttercream in there. And then I'll crimp the end of this scarf together and just kind of work it in there. So now to give our snowman some eyes, I'll just take a ball tool and just mark really lightly where I want to put them. I'll make sure they're nice and even. And then I'll roll some balls of black fondant just into some rough circles so they kind of look like coal, and then I'll just press these into place. So to give the sky a smile, you can just roll out little bits of black fondant. Same thing like in like irregular shapes or like irregular little circles like coal, and just shape them into a smile. So I actually think he looks a little bit cooler with just 4 little spots on his mouth, so we'll stick with that. And then just to add even more life to this snowman, I'm just going to dust his cheeks just a little bit with some really light pink petal dust, just to add some rosiness and color right to where his cheeks are. So to make my mittens, I'll just use 2 balls of red fondant. They're about the size of large gumballs, and I've kneaded them and rolled them until they were nice and smooth. So I'll just kind of shape it into kind of like a rounded teardrop shape. I'll do that to both. Then I'll flatten these down. So now I'll take my Dresden tool again, and I'm going to kind of slice in the inner fourth of this, just to make like what would be the little thumb hole, or thumb pocket, I guess, of the mitten. And I'll do the same thing here. So you round out the area where like the fingers would go, and then round out the little thumb area. And then to make the wrist part where they're going to attach to the stick, I'll just pinch the wrist. And then I'm going to take my ball tool again and just make some space so that the mitten can fit over the stick arm once I put it in place. So I like to place the first arm pretty high up towards his neck, just right behind his scarf. Press that in. And then once I have one in place, I'll get down to eye level with it and try and make it nice and even. So to place on the mittens, I'll use the little holes that I made, and then really gently just fit these over the part of the stick that I left exposed, just until it meets up with the stick. Awesome, there you go. So I have some brown buttons that I just cut out by rolling out some fondant to about 1/8 of an inch thick and cutting it out with a small circle cutter. So I'll take some buttercream and I'll start by placing the first button. And then I'll place on the final 2. And I'm using his nose as a guide to where I think the center line for these buttons is. Perfect. This dude is ready for a holiday party. So I had a lot of fun putting this snowman cake together, and I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this tutorial. If you have any questions about the process, how I did this, if you have any questions as you're watching the tutorial, just leave those comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. And I hope you guys enjoy making your very own snowman cake this holiday season. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, stay sweet.